The power grid never slept, and neither did David Chen. Sparks flew from his welding torch as he repaired another blown transformer in Sector 7 of the new Terra colony's main electrical facility. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled the air around him while he worked in the dim light of the industrial complex. At 34 years old, David had spent half his life keeping the lights on for the 40,000 colonists who called this distant world home. Thunder rolled across the sky outside, promising another violent storm. The weather on New Terra was unpredictable at best, and the constant electrical disturbances played havoc with the colony's power systems. David had learned to read the signs over the years. When the atmospheric pressure dropped and the air tasted like copper, he knew he would be working all night. He finished welding the last connection and stepped back to admire his work. The transformer hummed back to life, its deep vibration joining the chorus of machinery that kept the colony running. David wiped the sweat from his forehead and checked his watch. 3 in the morning. The storm was getting closer, and he still had 2 more sectors to check before dawn. As he gathered his tools, a sharp crack of lightning illuminated the sky, followed immediately by a sound that made David freeze. It was not thunder. It sounded like something screaming in pain, high-pitched and desperate. The noise came from somewhere near the perimeter fence that surrounded the facility. David grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the sound. The perimeter fence was electrified to keep out the local wildlife, which included some rather aggressive creatures that the colonists had not yet learned to properly classify. Most animals were smart enough to avoid the fence after the first encounter, but storms sometimes confused them. The screaming sound came again, weaker this time. David jogged toward the fence line, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Rain began to fall in heavy drops, making the ground slippery under his boots. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, David saw something tangled in the fence wires about 50 meters ahead. When he reached the spot, David could hardly believe what he found. Caught in the electrified wire was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was small, about the size of a house cat, but its body was covered in scales that shimmered with an odd metallic sheen. 2 delicate wings stretched out from its back, but they were torn and bleeding where the wire had cut through the thin membrane. Small horns protruded from its head, and when David shined his light on it, he could see that its eyes were closed in unconsciousness. The creature's breathing was shallow and rapid. David could see tiny sparks of electricity running along its scales, as if its body was somehow generating its own electrical field. The phenomenon was fascinating, but right now the little being was clearly dying. David had always been the type of person who could not walk past an injured animal. His mother used to joke that he brought home every stray cat and wounded bird he found as a child. This was different, though. This creature was obviously not from Earth, and David had no idea what it was or where it came from. But the sight of its labored breathing and torn wings made his decision for him. He turned off the power to that section of fence and carefully began to untangle the creature from the wire. Its skin was warm to the touch, almost feverish, and he could feel tiny electrical charges running through its body. The wings were worse than he had initially thought. The membrane was not just torn but seemed to contain some kind of organic circuitry, thin lines of what looked like biological wiring that had been severed when the creature hit the fence. As David worked to free the creature, he noticed that its wounds were not bleeding normal blood. Instead, a silvery fluid seeped from the cuts, and wherever it touched the metal fence, small sparks appeared. The creature's entire physiology seemed to be based on some kind of bioelectrical system that David had never encountered in any textbook. Once he had freed the creature from the fence, David wrapped it carefully in his work jacket and headed back to his workshop. The storm was getting worse, and he needed to get both of them out of the rain. His workshop was attached to the main facility and contained most of his tools and spare parts. It was not exactly a medical facility, but it would have to do. David laid the unconscious creature on his workbench under a bright lamp. In the better light, he could see just how unusual this being really was. Its scales were not quite like a reptile's scales, but more like tiny metallic plates that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of the light. The torn wings had an almost translucent quality, and David could see the intricate network of what looked like organic wiring running through them. He had no idea how to treat injuries like these, but his engineering background told him that the wing damage was similar to problems he dealt with every day. The organic circuits looked remarkably like the neural networks used in some of the colony's more advanced computer systems. If he could understand how they worked, maybe he could figure out how to repair them. David spent the next hour studying the creature's wing structure through a magnifying glass. The organic wiring was incredibly sophisticated, more complex than anything humans had developed. But the basic principles seemed familiar: electrical signals, conductivity, neural pathways. It was like looking at a biological computer that had evolved instead of being built. The creature stirred slightly, making a soft sound that was almost like a purr. David reached out carefully and touched its head. The scales were smooth and warm, and he could feel the creature's pulse through his fingertips. It was still alive, but clearly in bad shape. David made his decision. He was going to try to save this creature, whatever it was. He had no medical training for alien biology, but he understood electrical systems better than anyone on the colony. If this being's physiology was based on bioelectrical principles, then maybe his engineering skills could help where medical knowledge would fail. He began gathering supplies from around his workshop: thin copper wire, surgical tools that he kept for delicate electrical work, and various adhesives and sealants. It was going to be a long night, but David had never backed down from a challenging repair job. This would just be the most unusual one of his career. 3 days had passed since David found the injured creature, and his workshop had become something between a laboratory and a hospital room. Empty coffee cups and food containers littered his workbench alongside precision tools and medical supplies he had borrowed from the colony's clinic. The creature lay on a soft bed of towels under a heat lamp, breathing steadily but still unconscious most of the time. David had not slept more than a few hours at a stretch during those 3 days. Every spare moment was spent studying the creature's wing structure and trying to understand how its bioelectrical systems worked. He had filled 2 notebooks with drawings and calculations, mapping out the pathways of organic circuitry that ran through the delicate wing membranes. The more he learned, the more amazed he became. The creature's wings were not just organs for flight, but sophisticated biological computers that seemed to control much of its nervous system. The organic wiring carried both electrical impulses and some kind of biochemical signals that David was only beginning to understand. It was like nothing he had ever seen, yet the basic principles reminded him of the neural networks used in advanced artificial intelligence systems. On the second day, David had attempted his first repair. Using the thinnest copper wire he could find, he had carefully sutured one of the smaller tears in the left wing membrane. To his surprise, the creature's body had not rejected the foreign material. Instead, the organic tissue had begun to grow around the copper wire, incorporating it into the existing bioelectrical network. Encouraged by this success, David had grown bolder. He had fashioned microscopic wire graphs using techniques he had learned for repairing circuit boards, weaving them into the creature's wing structure with the patience of a master craftsman. Each repair required hours of work under a magnifying glass, but slowly the torn wings began to heal. The creature had awakened several times during the process, and each time it had surprised David with its behavior. Instead of trying to escape or showing fear, it seemed to understand that David was helping. It would lie still during the most delicate parts of the repair work, watching David's hands with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. David had started talking to the creature while he worked, the way he might talk to a nervous patient in a doctor's office. He explained what he was doing, described the tools he was using, and even shared stories about his life on the colony. The creature seemed to listen, tilting its head and making soft sounds that were almost like responses to David's conversation. On the 3rd morning, David made a breakthrough. He had been struggling to understand how the creature's bioelectrical system converted chemical energy into electrical impulses when he noticed something remarkable. The creature could actually interface with his electronic equipment. When it touched his multimeter, the device began displaying readings that David had never seen before, showing electrical patterns that seemed to come from the creature itself. David set up a series of simple experiments, placing various electronic devices near the creature to see how it would react. The results were fascinating. The creature could somehow sense the electrical fields generated by the equipment, and even seemed to be able to communicate with the devices in a way that David did not fully understand. When David's diagnostic computer started malfunctioning, the creature touched it gently with one claw, and the problem immediately resolved itself. It was during one of these experiments that David realized the creature was trying to help with its own repair. It began pointing with its small claws to specific areas on its wings, guiding David's attention to connections that needed to be made, or circuits that required different approaches. The collaboration between them became a strange dance of human engineering and alien intuition. David developed new techniques as he worked, combining his knowledge of electrical engineering with careful observation of how the creature's body responded to different materials and approaches. He discovered that graphene sheets could be used to create larger patches for badly damaged areas, and that silver wire conducted the bioelectrical signals better than copper in certain parts of the wing structure. The most challenging part was learning to work with the creature's natural healing process. Its body seemed to have an almost magical ability to regenerate damaged tissue, but only if the repairs were done in harmony with its biological rhythms. David learned to time his work with the creature's natural cycles, performing the most delicate operations when its bioelectrical activity was at its peak. As the wings began to heal, David noticed changes in the creature's behavior. It became more alert and responsive, and its eyes seemed brighter. The small electrical sparks that had run along its scales when David first found it returned, but now they seemed controlled and purposeful, rather than chaotic signs of injury. On the third evening, the creature attempted its first flight since the accident. David watched nervously as it spread its repaired wings and launched itself from the workbench. The flight was short and unsteady, but the wings held. The bioelectrical circuits that David had so carefully rewired functioned perfectly, carrying the signals needed for controlled flight. The creature landed on David's shoulder and made a sound that was unmistakably pleased. It nuzzled against his neck with obvious affection, and David felt a warm glow of satisfaction that had nothing to do with his engineering success. He had not just repaired a damaged creature, he had made a friend. Over the following days, the creature's strength continued to improve. Its flights became longer and more confident, and it began exploring David's workshop with obvious curiosity. It seemed particularly interested in his electronic equipment, often perching on his oscilloscope or circuit analyzer, while David worked on routine maintenance tasks for the colony. David found that having the creature around actually made his regular work easier. It could diagnose electrical problems with uncanny accuracy, pointing out loose connections or failing components that David might have missed. Its understanding of electrical systems seemed intuitive, as if it could actually see the flow of current through circuits and cables. The creature also began displaying other abilities that amazed David. It could generate small electrical charges from its claws, useful for testing circuits or powering small devices. Its bioelectrical field could detect power fluctuations in the colony's grid before David's instruments registered them, giving him advance warning of potential problems. But perhaps most remarkably, the creature seemed to be learning human technology with incredible speed. By the end of the week, it could operate some of David's simpler tools and even seemed to understand basic principles of electrical engineering. David began to suspect that this small being was far more intelligent than its size suggested. As David prepared for another night shift, he looked at his unusual companion and smiled. The creature had transformed his lonely workshop into something magical, a place where two very different forms of intelligence could work together toward common goals. He had no idea where the creature had come from or what species it belonged to. But David was certain of one thing. His life had been forever changed by this chance encounter with the extraordinary. While David Chen slept peacefully in his small apartment, unaware that his world was about to change forever, a massive ship moved silently through the darkness beyond New Terra Colony's outer detection grid. The vessel was unlike anything humanity had ever built, its hull seeming to shift and flow like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity. At over 2 kilometers in length, it moved through space without engines, propelled by forces that human science had not yet discovered. On the ship's command deck, a being of immense size and age stood before a viewing screen that showed the small human colony below. Elder Tiamat was ancient even by dragon standards, having lived for over 3,000 years. Her scales were deep emerald green shot through with veins of silver that pulsed with inner light. When she moved, electricity danced between her claws, and her eyes held the wisdom and power of millennia. Tiamat was the supreme leader of the Dragon Confederation, an alliance of 12 star systems inhabited by her people. Dragons had been traveling between the stars since before humans discovered fire, building a civilization based on the mastery of bioelectrical energy and the deep understanding of natural forces. To most dragons, humans were a curiosity at best, a young species that compensated for their brief lifespans with frantic technological development. But right now, Tiamat was not thinking about human limitations. She was thinking about her daughter. Spark had disappeared 3 days ago during what should have been a routine exploration mission to the edge of human space. Young dragons often undertook such journeys as part of their education, learning about the galaxy and the various species that inhabited it. Spark had been particularly interested in humans, fascinated by their rapid technological progress and their unusual approach to problem-solving. The search had been intense but fruitless until now. Tiamat's ships had scanned dozens of star systems looking for any trace of Spark's bioelectrical signature. The trail had finally led here, to this small human colony on the edge of civilized space. The readings were faint but unmistakable. Spark was alive and somewhere on the planet below. Tiamat's second-in-command, a younger dragon named Flame, approached with obvious concern. "Elder, we have detected Spark's presence in the human settlement, but her bioelectrical patterns are unusual. They appear to be modified in some way." The news sent a chill through Tiamat's ancient heart. Modified bioelectrical patterns could mean many things, none of them good. Had the humans captured Spark and experimented on her? Were they trying to study dragon physiology for some military purpose? Tiamat had heard stories of human curiosity and their tendency to dissect anything they did not understand. "Prepare a landing party," Tiamat ordered, her voice carrying the authority of 3 millennia. "We will retrieve my daughter and assess what these humans have done to her." Far below on the planet's surface, David was enjoying what had become his favorite part of each day. The creature he had rescued, which he had started calling Spark because of the small electrical displays it created when happy, was demonstrating a new ability. Spark could now interface directly with the colony's main computer system, diagnosing problems and suggesting improvements with remarkable accuracy. David watched in amazement as Spark perched on his main console, tiny claws touching various connection points while streams of data flowed across the screens. The creature had somehow learned to read human computer languages and was currently optimizing the power distribution algorithms that controlled the entire colony's electrical grid. "You are incredible," David said, gently stroking Spark's scales. The creature turned toward him with eyes that seemed to glow brighter when David showed affection. "I wish I knew where you came from. Your people must be missing you." Spark made a soft trilling sound and touched David's hand with one claw. A small, harmless electrical charge passed between them, and David felt a strange sensation, almost like memories that were not his own. For just a moment he saw flashes of images, vast ships moving through space, beings like Spark but much larger, and a sense of searching, of desperate worry. Before David could process what he had experienced, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed the workshop in red, and the colony's public address system crackled to life. "All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown vessels detected in orbit. This is not a drill. All personnel to emergency stations." David grabbed Spark gently and placed the creature on his shoulder, where it liked to perch when they traveled together. He ran toward the main control room, where other technicians were already gathering around the primary communications console. The colony's administrator, Director Harrison, was trying to establish contact with whatever had just arrived in their space. "Unknown vessels, this is New Terra Colony Control. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. You are in violation of our orbital space without prior clearance." The response that came through the speakers was unlike anything David had ever heard. The voice was deep and resonant, carrying an authority that seemed to reach into his bones and demand attention. "This is Elder Tiamat of the Dragon Confederation. We have come to retrieve what belongs to us. You will surrender the young dragon you have taken, and you will explain what modifications you have made to her bioelectrical systems." Silence fell over the control room like a physical weight. Dragon Confederation. David felt Spark tense on his shoulder, the creature's claws gripping his shirt tightly. Around the room, the faces of the colony staff showed a mixture of confusion and growing fear. Director Harrison found his voice first. We have no knowledge of any dragon. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, Tiamat's voice continued, each word carrying barely controlled anger. Our sensors clearly detect my daughter's bioelectrical signature within your settlement. She has been missing for 3 days and her patterns show signs of artificial modification. You will produce her immediately, or we will come and take her. David felt his world tilt on its axis. Daughter. Spark was not just some unknown alien creature. She was the child of whoever this Tiamat was. And from the sound of her voice, Tiamat was not someone who made idle threats. Spark made a soft sound and pressed against David's neck, as if seeking comfort. David reached up automatically to reassure the little creature, but his mind was racing. If Spark's mother was here, that was good news. The creature would be reunited with her family. But something about the tone of Tiamat's voice worried him. There was anger there and suspicion. Director Harrison was clearly out of his depth. We need time to search our records. If there is a creature matching your description in the colony, we will locate it and— You have 1 hour, Tiamat interrupted. After that, we will land and search for ourselves. I strongly advise you to cooperate. The communication channel closed, leaving the control room in tense silence. Director Harrison looked around at his staff with barely concealed panic. Does anyone know anything about a dragon? Any reports of unusual creatures? David felt Spark trembling against his shoulder and made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. Sir, I think I know what they are looking for. All eyes turned to David as he gently lifted Spark from his shoulder and held the creature where everyone could see. Gasps echoed around the room as the colonists got their first clear look at the being David had been caring for. I found her 3 days ago, injured and caught in the perimeter fence. I have been treating her injuries. David looked down at Spark, who gazed back at him with complete trust. I had no idea she was someone's daughter. Director Harrison stared at Spark for a long moment, then at David. You have been hiding an alien creature for 3 days? Do you have any idea what kind of situation you have put this colony in? David felt anger flare in his chest. I was saving her life. She was dying when I found her. And now her mother is threatening our entire colony. Harrison shot back. We need to hand her over immediately and hope they do not decide to destroy us all. David instinctively held Spark closer, and the creature pressed against his chest with obvious trust. The idea of just handing her over to angry strangers, even if one of them was her mother, felt wrong to David's protective instincts. We need to be smart about this, David said carefully. If Tiamat is as powerful as she sounds, we need to make sure Spark is safely returned. But we also need to make sure they understand we were helping, not harming her. Outside, the first of the dragon ships began their descent toward the colony's landing field. The time for debate was running out. The ground shook as the dragon ship settled onto New Terra Colony's main landing pad, with surprising gentleness for something so massive. David stood at the window of the administration building, holding Spark carefully while watching the most important moment in human history unfold before his eyes. The ship's hull seemed to pulse with inner light, and he could see smaller figures moving around its base as a ramp extended to touch the ground. Director Harrison paced nervously behind David, flanked by the colony's security chief and the head of their small diplomatic corps. None of them had any training for first contact with an alien species, especially one that had arrived making demands and threats. The original colonist handbook had a section on dealing with hostile wildlife, but nothing about returning lost alien children to their angry parents. Chen, you are going to walk out there with us and hand over that creature, Harrison said for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. We explained that we were trying to help. We apologize for any misunderstanding, and we hope they do not decide to glass our colony from orbit. David turned away from the window to face the director. Spark chirped softly and nuzzled against his neck, a gesture that had become familiar over the past few days. The thought of simply handing her over to strangers made David's protective instincts surge. What if they blame us for her injuries? David asked. What if they think we hurt her on purpose? Spark was nearly dead when I found her. If they are looking for someone to punish, they might not care about the details. Harrison's face was pale with stress. Then we hope your repair work is good enough to prove we were helping. Because if we do not hand her over willingly, They will take her by force and probably take revenge on all of us in the process. Through the window, David could see figures emerging from the ship. Even at a distance, it was clear that these beings were much larger than Spark. The smallest of them was easily 3 meters tall, with wingspans that seemed to stretch for 20 meters or more. Their scales caught the sunlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes of color, and David could see electricity dancing between their claws as they moved. The largest figure was clearly in command. When she stepped fully into view, David felt his breath catch in his throat. Elder Tiamat was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her emerald scales seemed to glow with inner fire, and her presence commanded attention even from this distance. When she looked toward the administration building, David felt as if those ancient eyes could see right through the walls to where he stood. "Incoming communication," announced the technician monitoring the radio. "They want to talk." Harrison nodded grimly and activated the speakers. "This is Director Harrison of New Terra Colony. We are prepared to discuss your daughter's return." Tiamat's voice filled the room, deep and resonant with barely controlled power. "You will bring my daughter to me now. I wish to see what you have done to her with my own eyes." David felt Spark press closer against him, and he realized the little creature was afraid. Not of him, but of the situation, of the anger in her mother's voice. David made a decision that probably violated every rule of diplomacy ever written. "Tiamat," he said, addressing the ancient dragon directly. "My name is David Chen. I am the human who found your daughter. She was badly injured when I discovered her, caught in an electrical fence and near death. I have spent the last 3 days treating her injuries and helping her heal." Silence stretched across the communication channel for long seconds. When Tiamat spoke again, her voice carried a note of surprise along with the anger. "You are the one who has modified her bioelectrical patterns. What did you do to my daughter, human?" David looked down at Spark, who gazed back at him with complete trust. "I repaired her wing membranes using electrical engineering techniques. Her organic circuitry was damaged, and I used wire grafts and biocompatible materials to restore function. She is healing well, but the repairs will probably always show up on your scans." Another long pause. David could hear other dragon voices in the background, speaking in a language that sounded like controlled thunder mixed with musical tones. "You claim to have performed bioelectrical surgery on my daughter," Tiamat said finally. "This is not possible. Humans lack the knowledge and skill for such procedures." Director Harrison stepped forward. "Elder Tiamat, Mr. Chen is our head electrician and one of our most skilled technicians. If he says he helped your daughter, then I believe him. I will judge the truth of this for myself," Tiamat replied. "Bring the human and my daughter to me. Now." David felt his heart hammering as the small group prepared to leave the safety of the administration building. Harrison had insisted on a full escort, but David suspected that if the dragons wanted to harm them, the colony's handful of security guards would not make much difference. As they walked across the landing field toward the massive dragon ship, David could feel the weight of alien eyes upon him. The dragons had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle around their ship, and David counted at least 20 of the massive beings. Each one was beautiful and deadly, their scales reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Tiamat stood at the center of the group, towering over even her own people. As David approached, he could see the intelligence in her ancient eyes, along with the deep worry of a parent who had lost a child. When she looked at Spark in David's arms, her entire expression changed. "Spark," she said, her voice suddenly gentle. "My daughter." Spark lifted her head and made a sound that was pure joy. She struggled in David's arms, clearly wanting to go to her mother, but she also looked back at David with obvious reluctance. The little creature was torn between two beings she cared about. David gently set Spark down on the ground between himself and Tiamat. "Go to your mother," he said softly. "She has been looking for you." Spark took a few steps toward Tiamat, then stopped and looked back at David. She made a series of complex sounds that David had learned meant she was trying to explain something important. Tiamat listened intently, her massive head tilted to one side. "She says you saved her life," Tiamat said, her voice filled with wonder. "She says you spoke to her while you worked, and that you were gentle and kind. She says you treated her like—" Tiamat paused as if struggling with the translation. "Like a treasured daughter." David felt warmth spread through his chest. "She is a remarkable being. I could not have done anything else. Tiamat extended one enormous claw toward Spark, who ran to her mother and was gently lifted up, but even as Tiamat held her daughter close, her eyes remained fixed on David. "Show me these repairs you claim to have made," Tiamat commanded. "I must understand what you have done." Spark spread her wings, and David heard several dragons gasp in surprise. The bioelectrical patterns flowing through the repaired wing membranes were clearly visible, and the integration of David's wire graphs with Spark's natural circuitry was seamless. Tiamat studied the repairs for several minutes, her expression growing more and more amazed. Finally, she looked up at David with something that might have been respect. "This is impossible," she said quietly. "These repairs are more sophisticated than anything our own healers could have achieved. How did a human learn to work with dragon bioelectrical systems?" David shrugged. "I treated her like any other electrical problem that needed fixing. I studied how her systems worked, figured out what was broken, and found ways to repair it using the materials I had available." "You speak of dragon physiology as if it were a simple machine," one of the other dragons said, his voice carrying disapproval. "Not simple," David corrected. "Complex and beautiful, but still something that could be understood and repaired if you approached it with the right knowledge and enough patience." Tiamat continued to stare at David, as if seeing him for the first time. "You have given my daughter back her ability to fly. More than that, you have improved upon her natural systems. The bioelectrical efficiency of these repairs exceeds our normal parameters." David felt a flush of pride at the praise, but he kept his voice humble. "I just wanted to help her. She was hurt and alone, and I could not leave her that way." Spark made a series of sounds from her mother's arms, looking back and forth between Tiamat and David. Tiamat listened carefully, then looked at David with an expression he could not read. "My daughter wishes to know if she can visit you again. She says you have become—" Tiamat searched for words. "She says you have become her friend." David smiled and reached out to gently touch Spark's head. "She will always be welcome, but that decision is yours to make." Tiamat was quiet for a long moment, studying David with ancient eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. When she finally spoke, her words would change the course of human history. "Perhaps it is time for our peoples to become friends as well." The dragon ship's medical bay was unlike anything David had ever imagined. Walls of what looked like living crystal pulsed with soft light, and the air itself seemed charged with energy that made his skin tingle. David sat on a platform that had somehow molded itself to his body shape, watching in fascination as Tiamat examined Spark's wings under equipment that appeared to be grown rather than built. 2 days had passed since first contact, and David found himself in the unprecedented position of being the first human ever invited aboard a dragon vessel. The invitation had come after Tiamat's initial examination of Spark's repairs had left her with more questions than answers. She wanted to understand exactly how David had achieved what her people's best healers could not. "The integration is perfect," Tiamat murmured, running a claw gently along one of Spark's wing membranes. "Your crude materials have been completely absorbed into her bioelectrical matrix." "How is this possible?" David leaned forward to get a better look at the diagnostic readings displayed on screens that seemed to float in midair. "I think it worked because I did not try to replace her natural systems. I just provided a framework for her body to rebuild around, like putting scaffolding on a damaged building so the original structure can heal itself." Tiamat's head turned toward David, her ancient eyes bright with interest. "Scaffolding. You speak of biological repair in terms of construction engineering. All electrical systems follow the same basic principles," David explained. "Whether they are made of metal and silicon or grown from living tissue, current flows along paths of least resistance, signals need clear pathways to travel, and damaged connections can be bridged if you understand the underlying patterns." The elder dragon was quiet for several minutes, absorbing this perspective. Around them, other dragons moved through the medical bay, preparing equipment and monitoring systems that David could barely comprehend. But despite their obvious technological superiority, they all seemed interested in David's explanations. "For 3,000 years, our healers have used bioresonance techniques to encourage natural healing," Tiamat said finally. "We work with the body's own energy patterns, guiding them back to their proper channels. But your approach was different. You imposed external structure to force healing along specific pathways." David nodded. "When I saw how badly damaged Spark's wing circuits were, I knew that natural healing alone would not be enough. The connections were completely severed in some places. I had to give her bioelectrical system new paths to follow while the original pathways regenerated. And these new paths became permanent, added Flame, the younger dragon who served as Tiamat's medical advisor. The wire graphs you installed have become part of Spark's natural circuitry. In some cases, they are actually more efficient than the original pathways. David felt a warm glow of satisfaction. I hope that might happen. Human electrical systems are designed for efficiency and reliability. If I could combine those principles with dragon bioelectrical sophistication, the result should be superior to either one alone. Spark chirped from her position on the examination platform and spread her wings wide. The repaired membranes glowed with soft patterns of light, and David could see the wire graphs he had installed now pulsing with the same rhythm as Spark's natural bioelectrical system. She had truly made his repairs part of herself. "Show me," Tiamat said suddenly. "I want to understand your techniques. We have other dragons who could benefit from such repairs." David blinked in surprise. "You want me to teach your healers human engineering?" "I want to learn from you myself," Tiamat corrected. "If human methods can improve upon dragon healing, then I must understand how." The collaboration that followed was unlike anything either species had experienced. David found himself working alongside beings who had millennia of experience with bioelectrical systems, sharing his knowledge of practical engineering while learning about dragon healing techniques that seemed almost magical to his human understanding. The first patient was a young dragon named Echo who had suffered wing damage in a mining accident several months earlier. Traditional dragon healing had restored basic function, but Echo could no longer achieve the precision flight control that dragons prized. The bioelectrical pathways in his left wing had healed improperly, creating interference patterns that disrupted his navigation abilities. David studied Echo's wing structure for hours, comparing it to the detailed scans that dragon medical equipment provided. The technology was far beyond human capabilities, showing individual cells and the quantum-level interactions between bioelectrical components. But the underlying problem was familiar to any electrician who had ever dealt with crossed wires and signal interference. The healing created multiple parallel pathways where there should be single channels. David explained to Tiamat and her medical team. "It is like having several radio stations broadcasting on the same frequency. The signals interfere with each other and create noise instead of clear communication. Our healers attempted to guide the pathways back to their proper configurations," Flame said, "but the body's healing response was too strong. The parallel pathways kept regenerating." David nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to give the healing response something specific to rebuild around. If I install wire guides along the correct pathways before we stimulate regeneration, the body will follow those guides instead of creating random connections." The procedure that followed combined dragon bioresonance healing with human engineering precision. David used microscopically thin wires to map out the correct pathways, while Tiamat and her team used their natural abilities to stimulate cellular regeneration along those specific routes. The process took 6 hours of delicate work, but the results were remarkable. Echo's wing function was not just restored, but actually improved beyond his original capabilities. The combination of dragon healing and human engineering had created bioelectrical pathways that were more efficient and resilient than nature alone had provided. Word of the successful procedure spread quickly through the dragon medical community. Within days, Tiamat's ship was receiving requests from dragon healers across the Confederation who wanted to learn these new techniques. The implications were staggering. Injuries that had been considered permanent disabilities could now be completely healed. But the collaboration went beyond medical procedures. As David spent more time aboard the dragon ship, he began to understand the fundamental differences between human and dragon approaches to technology. Dragons had evolved their science from biological principles, creating living systems that grew and adapted. Humans had developed from mechanical principles, building systems that could be taken apart, understood, and improved. "Your people think in straight lines," Tiamat observed during one of their long conversations. "You see a problem and immediately begin calculating the most direct path to a solution. We think in circles, working with natural patterns and allowing solutions to emerge gradually." David considered this while watching Spark play with some of the ship's younger crew members. "Maybe that is why my repairs work so well. I approach Spark's injuries like a mechanical problem. but I was working with a biological system. The combination gave her the best of both approaches. Precisely, Tiamat agreed. Your mechanical thinking provided structure, while her biological nature provided adaptability. The result is superior to either approach alone. As the days passed, David found himself becoming an unofficial ambassador between the two species. His natural curiosity and practical problem-solving approach resonated with dragons who had spent centuries working with complex bioelectrical systems. They began sharing knowledge freely, teaching David about energy manipulation techniques that could revolutionize human technology. In return, David introduced them to human concepts of modular design, standardized components, and rapid prototyping. Dragons had always created unique, custom solutions for each problem. The idea of building standardized parts that could be combined in different ways was revolutionary to their way of thinking. The breakthrough came when David suggested applying human manufacturing principles to dragon healing techniques. Instead of creating custom bioelectrical repairs for each patient, they could develop standardized components that could be adapted to different injuries. The process would be faster, more reliable, and could be taught to healers throughout the Confederation. You have given us something we did not know we needed, Tiamat told David as they watched Echo perform aerial maneuvers that would have been impossible before his treatment. In 3 days you have advanced our medical science by centuries. David smiled, watching Sparks soar alongside Echo in perfect formation. And you have shown me that there are approaches to engineering that I never imagined. Maybe our peoples have more to learn from each other than either of us realized. Tiamat's ancient eyes held a warmth that David was beginning to recognize. Indeed. Perhaps it is time to make this collaboration official. 6 months later, David stood in what had once been his simple workshop but was now the center of the most advanced research facility in human space. The room buzzed with activity as human engineers worked alongside dragon healers, their combined efforts producing medical technologies that neither species could have developed alone. The walls were lined with hybrid devices that seemed to grow from crystalline dragon biotechnology, while incorporating human electronic components. At the center of it all, Spark perched on David's shoulder, now serving as both translator and technical advisor. She had grown considerably since David first found her, though she was still small by dragon standards. Her wings bore the silvery traces of David's original repairs, which had become a badge of honor among the younger dragons who saw her as a bridge between two worlds. The new bioelectrical synthesis units are ready for testing, announced Dr. Sarah Kim, the human physician who had become David's primary research partner. If the simulations are correct, we should be able to treat spinal cord injuries that would have been impossible to heal with either human or dragon medicine alone. David nodded, checking the readouts on screens that displayed information in both human numerical formats and the flowing dragon bioelectrical patterns he had learned to read. Spark, can you verify the resonance frequencies are properly calibrated? Spark extended one claw to touch the nearest control surface, and the screens immediately filled with new data as she interfaced directly with the equipment. After a moment, she chirped affirmatively and made a series of sounds that David had learned meant the systems were functioning perfectly. The research facility had become possible thanks to a formal alliance between humanity and the Dragon Confederation, signed 3 months after David's first meeting with Tiamat. The treaty was unprecedented in galactic history, creating a partnership between species that operated on completely different technological principles. But the medical breakthroughs they had achieved together proved that their differences were actually strengths when properly combined. The door to the laboratory opened, and Tiamat entered with her usual commanding presence. Despite spending months working closely with the ancient dragon, David still felt a thrill of awe whenever she appeared. Today, however, she was accompanied by someone David had never seen before. David, I would like you to meet Elder Cosmos of the Galactic Council, Tiamat said formally. He has come to observe our work and evaluate its implications for the wider galaxy. Cosmos was unlike either human or dragon, his crystalline form shifting between different geometric patterns as he moved. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in David's bones. So you are the human who has caused such disruption in galactic medical science, Cosmos said, though his tone suggested curiosity rather than accusation. Your techniques have spread far beyond the Dragon Confederation. 6 different species have now requested access to hybrid bioelectrical healing methods. David felt a flush of pride mixed with nervousness. I was just trying to help an injured creature. I had no idea it would lead to all this. That is precisely what makes it so remarkable, Cosmos replied. You approached an unknown problem with no preconceptions, no institutional barriers, and no fear of failure. The result has been a medical revolution that is spreading across the galaxy. Spark made a pleased sound and nuzzled against David's neck. She had become something of a celebrity among the various species that had learned about the Alliance, often cited as proof that cooperation between different forms of life could produce extraordinary results. The Council has made a decision, Cosmos continued. We want to establish similar research partnerships between other species. The human approach to problem-solving appears to be uniquely effective when combined with more advanced biological sciences. David looked at Tiamat, who nodded encouragingly. They want to use our facility as a model for other interspecies collaborations. Human engineers working with the Crystalline Collective's quantum biologists, with the Plant Federation's photosynthetic specialists, with the Energy Beings consciousness researchers. The implications were staggering. David had spent his entire life as a simple electrician, keeping the lights on for a small human colony. Now he was being asked to help design a network of research facilities that could advance science across the entire galaxy. What would my role be in something like that? David asked. You would be the first human scientific ambassador, Cosmos explained. Your job would be to teach other species the human approach to engineering and problem-solving, while learning from their unique perspectives. You would help establish research partnerships and develop new hybrid technologies. David felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I am just an electrician. I do not have advanced degrees or formal training in xenobiology or galactic diplomacy. Exactly, Tiamat said with what David had learned to recognize as her version of a smile. You approach problems without the limitations that formal training often imposes. You see solutions where specialists see only obstacles. Spark chirped and pointed toward one of the monitoring screens, where a new patient was being prepared for treatment. The being was a member of the insectoid hive, whose distributed nervous system had been damaged in an industrial accident. Traditional medicine could not repair the damage because the patient's consciousness was spread across multiple brain clusters. But David and his team had developed a technique that used human networking principles combined with dragon bioelectrical healing. Look at what you have accomplished in just 6 months, Tiamat continued. You have healed injuries that were considered impossible to treat. You have taught ancient species new ways of thinking about problems, and you have proven that cooperation between different forms of life can achieve what none of us could accomplish alone. David watched as the insectoid patient was carefully connected to the hybrid healing system. The treatment would take several hours, but early results suggested that the distributed consciousness damage could be completely repaired. It was the kind of breakthrough that would have been impossible without combining human engineering with dragon bioelectrical science. I will need Spark with me, David said finally. She is my translator, my technical advisor, and my friend. I could not do this work without her. Spark made a joyful sound and pressed against David's cheek. Tiamat's expression grew warm with approval. Of course, Spark has already requested permission to accompany you. She wishes to see the galaxy and help establish new friendships between species. Over the following weeks, David prepared for a journey he could never have imagined. The research facility would continue operating under Dr. Kim's direction, with dragon healers and human engineers working together to develop new treatments. But David's mission would take him far beyond the familiar boundaries of human space. His first assignment would be to the Crystalline Collective, a species of living mineral beings who had mastered quantum biology, but struggled with mechanical engineering. After that, he would visit the Plant Federation's garden worlds, where photosynthetic beings had created living cities, but needed help with infrastructure systems. Each partnership would be different, requiring David to learn new forms of communication and new ways of thinking about problems. But the fundamental principle would remain the same, combining human practical engineering with the unique capabilities of other species to achieve results that none of them could accomplish alone. On the day of departure, David stood at the observation deck of Tiamat's ship, looking down at New Terra Colony where his journey had begun. The small human settlement looked peaceful from orbit, its lights twinkling in the darkness like a handful of scattered stars. Spark perched on the railing beside him, her wings spread wide to catch the ship's artificial breeze. The repairs David had made to her wings were still visible as silver traceries through the membrane, but they had become something beautiful rather than just functional. Other young dragons often asked to see her wings, wanting to understand how human engineering had become part of dragon biology. "Are you ready for this adventure?" David asked quietly. Spark chirped and touched his hand with one claw, sending a small electrical charge between them. In that moment, David felt her excitement and confidence, her certainty that they would succeed in whatever challenges lay ahead. "The galaxy is vast," Tiamat said, joining them at the observation deck. "There are thousands of species, each with their own unique approaches to science and technology. Some will be eager to learn from humans, others will be skeptical or even hostile. But if you approach each new challenge the same way you approached Spark's injuries, with patience and creativity and compassion, you will find solutions that none of us could have imagined." David nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the excitement of unlimited possibility. He thought about that night 6 months ago when he had found a small, injured creature caught in an electrical fence. He had made a simple decision to help, not knowing that it would change his life and potentially the course of galactic civilization. As the ship turned away from New Terra Colony and headed for the jump point that would take them to their first destination, David realized that the most important thing he had learned was that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. All it took was the willingness to reach out and help when someone needed it, regardless of how different they might seem. Spark made a contented sound and settled more comfortably on the railing, her bioelectrical patterns pulsing in rhythm with the ship's energy systems. Together they would explore the galaxy and help build bridges between species that had never imagined they could work together. The adventure was just beginning.